Dr. Sarah Chen had been on the forest planet of Verdantia for 3 standard months, and she still couldn't believe her luck. The assignment was supposed to be simple: catalog the local flora, take samples, analyze the ecosystem, and report back to the Terran Research Council. What she hadn't expected was to become the unofficial caretaker of 4 predator cubs whose species didn't even have an official name yet. The locals called them shadow claws, massive apex predators that stood nearly 3 meters tall when fully grown. Their fur was a deep midnight blue that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns, and their eyes glowed with an intelligence that made Sarah's scientific mind race with questions. Adult shadow claws were solitary hunters, fierce and territorial. But these 4 cubs, orphaned when their mother fell protecting them from a rock slide, had somehow decided that Sarah was their new parent. It started innocently enough. Sarah had been preparing her evening meal outside her research dome, cooking a simple stew over her portable heating unit. The smell must have attracted them because suddenly 4 pairs of glowing eyes appeared at the edge of her campsite. Most humans would have run. Sarah had frozen, her hand slowly moving toward the sonic deterrent on her belt. But the cubs hadn't attacked. The smallest one, whom Sarah would later name Pip, had simply walked up to her cooking pot, sniffed it curiously, and made a sound somewhere between a purr and a chirp. The others followed, circling her cautiously but without any signs of aggression. They were hungry, she realized, and alone. Against every regulation in the handbook, Sarah had shared her meal with them that night. They devoured the stew, synthetic meat and all, then curled up around her dome and fell asleep. When she woke the next morning, they were still there, waiting. That was 2 months ago. Now Sarah was stirring a pot of vegetable soup, humming softly to herself, as the twin suns of Verdantia began their descent toward the horizon. The 4 cubs, now significantly larger and more confident, lounged around her campsite like oversized house cats. Pip was the smallest, barely reaching Sarah's shoulder. Then came Dash, named for his incredible speed. Nova had bioluminescent patterns brighter than her siblings, and Tank was the largest, built like his name suggested. Sarah was just adding some herbs she'd cultivated from earth seeds when Pip suddenly stood up, ears perked forward. The cub made that chirping sound again and bounded toward the forest edge. Before Sarah could call out, Pip disappeared into the undergrowth. "Pip! Wait!" Sarah called, but the cub was already gone. She sighed and returned to her cooking, making a mental note to check on the cub in a few minutes if she didn't return. She didn't have to wait long. 5 minutes later, Pip came crashing back through the ferns, something clutched carefully in her jaws. The cub trotted up to Sarah with obvious pride and dropped her prize at the human's feet. It was a mushroom. A very large, very purple mushroom that Sarah had never seen before. "Oh, Pip, that's sweet, but I don't know if that's safe to eat," Sarah said gently, kneeling down to examine the fungus. Pip sat back on her haunches, tail swishing with what Sarah had learned to recognize as excitement. The cub nudged the mushroom toward the cooking pot with her nose. Sarah pulled out her scanner and ran it over the mushroom. To her surprise, it came back non-toxic, rich in proteins, and remarkably similar in cellular structure to earth shiitake mushrooms. "Well, I'll be damned. Good find, Pip." Encouraged by Sarah's praise, Pip let out a triumphant chirp that brought the other 3 cubs to attention. Dash immediately jumped up and raced into the forest. Tank followed at a slower, more deliberate pace. Nova looked between Sarah and her siblings, then decided to follow. Sarah had a sinking feeling about where this was going. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Dash came bounding back with something green and leafy clenched delicately in his jaws. He dropped it proudly at Sarah's feet, then sat down with his chest puffed out, clearly waiting for praise. Sarah examined the plant. It looked like a cross between earth lettuce and some kind of aquatic weed, with broad leaves that dripped with moisture. Her scanner indicated it was edible, high in vitamins, and had a slightly sweet flavor profile. "This is actually amazing, Dash. Thank you." Sarah gave the cub a scratch behind his ears, right where she'd learned he liked it. Dash's purr was so loud it vibrated through her hand. Before she could process this new development, Tank emerged from the forest carrying an entire branch in his mouth. Dangling from the branch were clusters of small orange berries that looked like tiny lanterns. Tank dropped his contribution with a satisfied grunt, nearly knocking over Sarah's water container in the process. The scanner indicated the berries were not only edible, but packed with antioxidants and natural sugars. They'd make an excellent addition to the soup, or perhaps a dessert. "Tank, you gentle giant, this is perfect," Sarah laughed, patting the massive cub's shoulder. Tank leaned into her touch, nearly knocking her over with his weight. Nova was the last to return, and she carried the most unusual item yet. Clutched carefully in her jaws was what appeared to be a bundle of thin, golden roots, still covered in dark soil. She placed them at Sarah's feet with immense care, then looked up at the human with those intelligent, glowing eyes. Sarah cleaned off the roots and scanned them. They were tuberous vegetables, similar to earth carrots, but with a complex flavor profile that included notes of ginger and nutmeg. "Nova, how did you even know these were underground? These are incredible!" The 4 cubs sat in a semicircle around Sarah, their tails swishing in synchronized happiness. They watched her expectantly, waiting to see what she would do with their offerings. Sarah looked at the pile of ingredients, then at her simple vegetable soup, then back at the cubs. An idea began to form in her mind. "All right, you 4. If you're going to help me cook, we're going to do this properly. Let me show you something." She pulled out her field knife and carefully began preparing the ingredients. She sliced the purple mushrooms into thick strips, their flesh releasing a pleasant, earthy aroma. The green leaves were torn into manageable pieces. The orange berries were separated from their branch, and the golden roots were peeled and diced. The cubs watched with rapt attention as Sarah added each ingredient to the pot. She explained what she was doing as she worked, knowing they couldn't understand her words but hoping they'd grasp the concepts through observation. "The mushrooms go in first because they take longer to cook. See how they release their moisture? That adds flavor to the broth." Pip leaned forward, her nose twitching as she inhaled the scent. "The roots go in next. They need time to soften, but not so long that they turn to mush." Tank rumbled approvingly, as if he understood the importance of texture. "The leaves are delicate, so they go in near the end. Just enough time to wilt, but not disintegrate." Dash's ears perked up at the sizzling sound as the leaves hit the hot broth. "And the berries? Those are special. We save them for last, just a minute or 2 in the pot, so they're warm and slightly softened but still hold their shape." Nova's bioluminescent patterns flickered brighter, casting dancing lights across the campsite. As the soup cooked, filling the air with an aroma that was entirely new and utterly delicious, Sarah found herself reflecting on how strange and wonderful her situation was. She was millions of light years from Earth, cooking a meal with ingredients she'd discovered just minutes ago, surrounded by apex predators who'd decided she was worth protecting. The Terran Research Council would probably have her removed from the field if they knew she was this close to unclassified predators. But as she looked at the 4 cubs, each one watching the cooking pot with anticipation, Sarah couldn't bring herself to care about regulations. When the soup was ready, Sarah ladled portions into 5 bowls, one for her and one for each cub. The cubs had learned to eat from bowls weeks ago, though their table manners left something to be desired. They ate together as the sun set and the forest came alive with nocturnal sounds. The soup was incredible, a perfect blend of familiar and exotic flavors. The mushrooms added depth, the leaves provided freshness, the roots gave it substance, and the berries offered little bursts of sweetness that balanced the savory elements. Pip finished first and immediately looked toward the forest, as if already planning tomorrow's contribution. Dash licked his bowl clean with such enthusiasm that he pushed it halfway across the clearing. Tank ate slowly and methodically, savoring each bite. Nova alternated between eating and watching Sarah, mimicking the way the human used her spoon. After dinner, as Sarah cleaned the bowls and stored the leftover soup, the cubs settled into their usual sleeping positions around her dome. Tank positioned himself at the door, an immovable guardian. Dash and Nova curled up on either side, their bodies touching to share warmth. Pip, the smallest, claimed her favorite spot right next to Sarah's sleeping mat, close enough that Sarah could feel the cub's warmth through the dome's wall. Sarah sat outside for a while longer, making notes in her research log. She documented the new species she'd discovered today, all thanks to her unusual helpers. She noted the cubs' problem-solving abilities, their capacity for mimicry, and their apparent desire to contribute to the group's welfare. But mostly, she wrote about connection, about how life found ways to bridge impossible gaps, about how beings from different worlds could recognize kindness and respond to it, about how the universe was vast and strange and often terrifying, but also full of moments like this, where an unlikely family could share a meal together under alien stars. The next morning, Sarah woke to find all 4 cubs sitting expectantly outside her dome, their eyes bright with anticipation. Before she'd even started breakfast, they were already heading toward the forest. By the time Sarah had her cooking pot set up, they'd returned. Pip brought a different variety of mushroom, these ones a soft yellow color. Dash carried some kind of tuber that looked like a purple potato. Tank had found a plant with edible flowers that tasted like mild pepper. Nova presented a handful of seeds that, when roasted, would provide a nutty crunch. Sarah laughed, a sound of pure joy that echoed through the clearing. "All right, team, let's see what we can make today." As she began preparing another unique meal with her predator cubs gathered around her, Sarah realized something profound. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons or even their adaptability. It was this, the ability to find family anywhere, with anyone, across any divide. The Shadowclaw cubs had decided Sarah was Pack, and she had accepted that role without hesitation. Together, they were writing a new story, one that the Terran Research Council would study for generations. A story about trust and cooperation, about learning and teaching, about sharing meals and building bonds. And it had all started because 4 orphaned predator cubs wanted to help her cook, bringing random ingredients from the forest, offering the best gifts they knew how to give. In the vast, complicated universe, sometimes the most important discoveries weren't about new elements or alien technologies. Sometimes they were about finding out that kindness was universal, that family could take any form, and that a shared meal could bridge the distance between worlds.